Why did you choose philosophy of science?
The science? Well, let me explain that to you. I did mathematics as an undergraduate and some philosophy. And at school, high school, I'd done physics and chemistry. So when I started doing philosophy, then the question was, what was I going to be interested in? And, you might think that somebody like myself, who came from a Quaker background, would have been attracted to ethics or those things. Well, I didn't find ethics in those days very exciting. And looking back, I don't think it was. But the philosophy of science was interesting because science, obviously, in the years after the war, was a big thing, putting up rocket ships and all of these sorts of things. And then the double helix had come along. And so suddenly biology was becoming not just, as it were, going out and collecting plants, but getting very exciting theoretically. So I was attracted to philosophy of science. And my supervisor said, well, if you're going to write what they call in England a thesis, but what they call a dissertation in America, you need an area where there's some literature, but it's not very good. And you can, as it were, move in and do something yourself. So I chose biology and I never looked back. Now, the other thing was, in the 1960s, Thomas Kuhn, with the Structure of Scientific Revolution, was very, very influential. I don't think any philosopher ever believed what Kuhn said philosophically, but he'd said, if you want to understand the philosophy of science, you've got to do the history of science. So I started to look at Darwin, and I'd always been interested in Victorian literature. Coming from England, I'd done, I'd read a lot of Anthony Trollope and Charles Dickens and those sorts of things. So reading Charles Darwin, who was, completely out of that same ambiance, that same period, was a piece of cake for me. So I did this, and I found that I enjoyed it immensely, even to the extent in 1962, when I had my first sabbatical, I went to Cambridge to kind of retool, as it were, as a historian of science. I never looked back. Now, just to continue the story, so this meant then that although about the age of 20, my religious faith just faded away. It wasn't, I didn't wake up one morning sort of Richard Dawkins style and say, oh my God, Moses was wrong, Richard Dawkins is right, God does not exist, or anything like that. I mean, it was just something that happened. I mean, I just suddenly realized that I don't think I believe in God, and I thought about it. I really don't think I do. I mean, I always joke that I identified God with my headmaster, nasty bullying kind who didn't like me. But anyway, no, but it wasn't really that. It just somehow God didn't speak to me and still doesn't. But because I was interested in Darwin, or because of my Quaker background, and of course the thing about being a Quaker is they don't have any dogmas or creeds. You have to think about it yourself. So we young Quakers spent an awful lot of time, Sunday lunch, Sunday picnic lunches, sitting down, 15 or so of us talking about these things. So on the one hand, doing philosophy was a natural, but also as I got into Darwin and found how important religion had been around the time of Darwin and the Darwinian Revolution, I found that a lot of this was, I wasn't familiar, but I felt comfortable. I didn't go at it as a believer, but the debates and the discussions were things that I'd had as a child. Obviously, much more sophisticated by the time you get into your 30s, but still very much, as it were, of the same kind. So I felt very comfortable about this. Then, about 1975, I'd have been 35 then, 36, the creationist movement started to become a big thing. It had been there all the time, but by about 1975, 76, some of the leading creationists like Dwayne T. Gish and Henry Morris were getting a lot of effect, and they were pushing to get creationism, that means Genesis, introduced in schools, not in comparative religion classes, but in biology classes as an alternative to evolution. And so there were debates going on, and they'd debate, and I, almost despite, like, certainly not by intention, but I was asked to do a couple of debates with the creationists, and showing off, I found I was pretty good at this, because apart from everything else, I'd spent 10, 15 years teaching undergraduates 3 courses a semester, twice a year. So I was, put it this way, I was very experienced at going into a class before an audience and simplifying, not getting lost in technicalities of analytic philosophy or that sort of thing, but able to, as it were, take it and present it as something that you could talk to your mum and dad about, around the dinner table. And so I think I was pretty good at it, but I was certainly very experienced at it. And one thing led to another. And then in 1981, in the state of Arkansas, they passed a law which was insisting, they called it balanced treatment, that if you taught evolution in classrooms, in biology class, we're talking about biology classrooms, we're not talking about comparative studies or anything like that, but if you taught evolution in biology classes, you had also to teach creationism, Genesis, balanced treatment. Well, of course, the American Civil Liberties Union said this is a violation of the separation of church and state, the First Amendment to the Constitution, so they brought a case against it. And I was hauled in as one of the expert witnesses, along with people like Stephen Jay Gould, the geneticist or the evolutionist, and Langdon Gilkey, who at the time was the most prominent Protestant theologian in America. He was on the faculty of Harvard, Chicago Divinity School. So I went down to Arkansas as a witness, and sounding immodest, it all went very well. And so we actually won, in the sense that creationism was thrown out of the schools. But it meant that I was now warming up to the topic. I knew about it. I'm the sort of person, if I know about something like this, I write about it. And of course, equally, I found a lot of liberal Christians approached me and said, we really appreciate what you've done. I wish you'd come and talk to us and be with us. We're not going to try and convert you. That's not where we're at. But we feel that you and we have some common ground to talk about. And so I started doing this, including going to a summer conference, which I was planning on doing this year at Star Island off the coast of New Hampshire, once a year for a week. And I found myself very comfortable then dealing with science and religion. With evolution, I wasn't going to spend a lot of time talking about quantum mechanics and God and that sort of thing. But I could talk, and did talk a lot about a lot. My whippet wants to join in the conversation. You can hear me. I cannot bear to be left out of any discussion. Worse, I tell you, whippets are worse than children. Anyway, so as I say, I found myself getting increasingly interested in the topic and writing about it, as of course other people like Steve Gould were doing. I mean, we wrote about these topics. I mean, he wrote his book on, Rocks of Ages, and I wrote my book, Can a Darwinian Be a Christian, which came out in 2001. And so, to a certain extent, this is what I've done ever since. Now, I should say that I'm never happy unless I'm upsetting people. My headmaster would have told you that. But it's true. I always feel uncomfortable if I'm in the majority with the serious people.